Hi, and welcome to the Yeshiva Shem and Aver online classes. I'm Rabbi David Katz, and this is the Wednesday night edition, 11 p.m. Israel, our third class in the topic of the ger, an ongoing series of investigating every ger in the Torah, which is around 100 references. The first two classes were an introduction to verses that are much later on in the Torah, actually in Devarim. A couple were in Genesis. But the point was to introduce a launch into the concept of the ger. And there really is no easy way to get into the ger. There's no kindergarten class for the ger. It's once the ger is mentioned in the Torah with Abraham, it's pedal to the metal, and just all the revelation comes. So our job now is to go over every reference in the Torah, and by the end, we will have a very clear understanding of the ger. Now, just before I can continue with today's class, which, while I'm speaking, if you want to look it up, we're going with, I believe, the second or third verse in the Torah of the ger, which is Genesis 23:4. Abraham buying the cave of Machpelah and claiming to be ger ve toshav anochi. I am a ger and I am toshav, I am. That's going to be our verse. Now, before I get into this, I want to just make one thing clear, or unclear as it may. I'm sure many have heard of the divine code in English, and or maybe are equally aware that the divine code in English is based on Rabbi Moshe Weiner's 3-volume Hebrew called Sefer Sheva Mitzvahs Hashem, the book of the 7 mitzvahs of God. I received them in the mail yesterday, and I was delighted to be involved for the last 30 hours of possession. I have so much to say, it's not even funny. I'll just describe it a little bit. Kind of off the cuff in a non-lecturing format. Because this book is going to be a major foundation in this class from this point onwards. And I'll explain a little bit about that. To give the best analogy, anybody who follows my blog and my work knows that I'm involved in the principles of mazal and how mazal is in the world and how we all have it, and not from the constellations, but how we have the breadcrumb trail, from the upper world from God, and how it leaks out into our lives as really an interface with God and an active relationship with God. That's called mazal. When your life has patterns and structure and orbit and a certain kind of taste to it and feel for it, and we go in the same rhythm all the time. Same types of people come into our lives. Some people are always living on the edge. Some people live moderately. Whatever it is, that's what you identify with as called your world. That's really what your mazal is. And when you become a master of your mazal, you become a master of your world, and you know how to work with God to the point that you're always current in the present moment. That's one theme that I work with. Now, why am I bringing this up? As mazal would have it, I was in a bookstore in Sfat where I always go to get my books, and I look on the bookshelf, and there is a book written by a random rabbi, never heard of him. It's called the Encyclopedia of Mazal. Right? Every authoritative rabbinical statement ever uttered about mazal. And it was mazal that I found it. And when I would read the book, I would learn it really was mazal that I found the book. Because the book educates that Torah comes to us through mazal. I mean, you cannot go in this world telling yourself, all right, I'm going to learn this, I'm going to learn that. You're not strong enough to know what you need to learn. Nobody is. So God delivers you the books and the education that you need. You know, when you heard, oh yeah, I heard that one book, I'd like to read that. That was God sending you that message, you know, from a friend who said it was interesting. God basically teaches you the Torah through mazal. Your job is to be receptive, pluck out the fish from the water, or the book from the bookshelf, and learn the book. And then it goes all the way into the microcosm and macrocosm. You read the book, but then God helps you kind of in between the lines with mazal to help you learn. You know, maybe you wouldn't have understood this line, but because you were on vacation in this town that the book was talking about, you can understand what the author was saying, and that was the crux of the argument of the author. You know, mazal in between the lines allows you to absorb, and then the way it was written. There's mazal in how things are written. We might call this the divine inspiration of Rashi. Rashi wrote with divine inspiration, and there's mazal. Now, where do we see this the most? That the order of the Torah, if you understand, let's say, the mazal of the Torah, you know, the flow of why it goes from topic to topic, more essentially in the Talmud, this is more apparent, then also you can extract mounds of wisdom from the mazal of how it was actually written. So mazal and Torah are intertwined as one, literally. Your lot of life is mazal, and Torah allows you to connect to and change with your mazal. That's just that. Now, the reason why I'm going again into this in a bit detail is because the book was amazing. It literally encapsulated all of these ideas. So after I had studied mazal on my own for a while, it was very, very reassuring and refreshing to read what, you know, now after, you know, my hocus pocus learning of you know, just own intuition or finding things on my own, to find that somebody sat down and combed the entire Torah and pulled it together in an encyclopedia of mazal, it blew my mind. So I'm going to say that Rabbi Moshe Weiner did the same thing. Did the exact same thing. And, you know, everyone's telling me the divine code says this, the divine code says that, you know, and I've heard things about Rabbi Moshe Weiner, what he's written in the past, you know, and I'm thinking this is a nightmare. So as I get the book open, pretty much today for the first time, I was pretty busy yesterday, I am very, very delighted. Now, what I'll say is, it's just like the Mazal book. What Rav Moshe Weiner, and then again, this is education for the topic. Why? Because everybody needs to know what these books are, and we're going to be referring to these books for the next forever, literally. So even if I get into my class today, I want to address this off the cuff. And if we do get into the verse, so be it. If we don't, so be it. I just wanted to get this out. What he has done is grabbed every Noahide, Ben Noah, Ger, you name it. When it comes to philosophy from the rabbis, law from the rabbis, he has compiled it in a very, very methodical encyclopedia of the Noahide. Now, he calls it the Shulchan Aruch of the Noahide. That is not a fair statement. As much as I would say that my Mazal book is not the Shulchan Aruch to Mazal. Because A, you have to have knowledge going into that book, so to this book. B, the Shulchan Aruch is very organized. Very, very organized. This is very not organized. This is a very high piece of rabbinical literature. But just like with the Mazal book, there was a Mazal in how he wrote it. It's like when you get the fringe benefits of what you work with. Right? If you work in a pizza shop, you're probably going to eat a lot of free pizza. And when they wrote the Mazal book, you have to figure if you're writing the book of Mazal, you're going to have Mazal in your writing. If you're writing a book of poetry, it's not going to sound like a German car instruction. It's going to sound poetic. So here, Rav Weiner's bringing down the laws of the ger, the Noahide, and he has a very tremendous bracha, blessing, in how he was able to compile everything ever spoken about in these matters. He's brought everything in. Anybody that knows, let's say, for example, Rabbi Ginsburg. Many people know Rabbi Ginsburg. He's into the Kabbalah and one of the originators of, let's say, modern culture and gematria and hints, much like what I do on my website. So people that are like me owe a lot of thanks to Rabbi Ginsburg for really blowing it open, let's say, back even to the 70s. He did a lot of people to become a Baal Tshuva, repent, become religious or observant or whatever, Noahides and Jews, because of his flavors of Torah. But most importantly, what gave him validity, and I still remember the letters book of the alphabet that I still have, one of the first books I got when I went to yeshiva, is he was very, very methodical and encyclopedic. For, let's say, the letter Gimel, he brought everything that had 3, because the gematria Gimel's 3, everything that began with a Gimel, and you read the book and you said, man, I don't understand a word of what he said, but I understand everything there is about the number 3 in the letter Gimel. And as you grow up in Torah, you realize how much was really packed in that book. Rav Weiner, the same thing. He wrote it as an encyclopedia for the Noahides. With that said, it's very, very rabbinical, very, very advanced, and it is a tremendous, tremendous work. It is not for the layman, and I want to draw some of the examples at the end of class today from that book. So that it's a very fascinating book. I highly endorse it. I plan on getting in touch with him just to find out what he was about when he did it. And that's it. So now we've reached home base on the Shulchan Aruch for the Noahide and the Divine Code. I will refrain from comment at this time. However, I'm largely unimpressed. It is not accurate. We'll get to that. It's not what it should be, but it's not to take away from Rabbi Weiner, and their English book was not meant to be an exact translation. So more on that as time will come. Anyways, so we're gonna, from this point onwards, I'm going to include a lot of material in these classes of the Ger with the Shulchan Aruch of Rabbi Weiner. That said, let's go ahead. Genesis 23:4. Follow along. I am an alien and a resident among you. Grant me an estate for a burial site with you, that I may bury my dead from before me. This should sound familiar to everybody. This is Abraham buying Machpelah, the burial grounds of Sarah, that Abraham will join, along with Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah, and prophetically been told Adam and Eve were already there. The number one thing that sticks out from this association of the Ger in the flow of the verses of the Torah, Abraham says something very, very peculiar. Ger v'toshav anochi. Everybody in the world will read this the wrong way, because they're in a hurry, and they'll say, Ger toshav I am. I am a Ger toshav. As we saw in the art scroll I just read, it says, I'm an alien. Actually, I said it right, I think, alien and a resident. But in the Hebrew, most people would assume it says Ger toshav. The revelation that we have here is there's a vav between Ger and toshav. Ger vit toshav anochi. That vav has the ability to open up this passage from something, let's say, as a flick of the eye, just glancing over it, moving on, not thinking twice. I'm from out of town, lechacha. Okay, this becomes the door to our Ger discussion. Without the vav, there's nothing to talk about for our ger. Once we get the vav inside, ger ve toshav anochi, ger and toshav I am. The commentators, especially the Or Chaim and the Torah, blow this up into all of our famous friends of the ger. Now, when I say famous friends, and again, this is largely in Rabbi Weiner's book. I would even say 80% is whenever we get a new topic or a new direction, it's as if all we do is make one or two subtle adjustments, and then all the same story comes in. And that's what I think we're going to find with every ger in the Torah. We're going to learn a couple of new things each time, and then once we clear the hurdles of the new things to learn, then all the old friends are going to come back. And really it's these what I'm calling the friends that we need to know, like the mitzvah with the ger, and how the relationship between the ger and the Jew is, what kind of ger we're talking about. All those themes just recycle. There's never anything new, really, except for only a few new things on the external of each ger in the verses. So here, ger toshav doesn't mean much. But when we say ger and toshav, that's where it blows up. Before I get into blowing it up, let's just do a couple of deeper little associations I found. Ger v'toshav anochi is the gematria 998, which is the full value gematria of kedusha, holiness, showing that there's an innate holiness with ger and toshav I am anochi, meaning the ger toshav. Which, again, as I go through the class, think about all the levels that we're discussing, and just know that there's an inherent holiness with all of those things. This one I'm about to say is a little shocking, but you have to say it's true. Ger v'toshav anochi, the end letters spell rabbi, resh beit yud. The initial letters spells gimel aleph vav, meaning the pride of the rabbi. Now, why do I say that? Because of the divine code. Really, it's the difference between the Moshe Weiner's book versus the divine code. The divine code, or the Moshe Weiner book, is the essence of, let's say, honest scholarship. Researching, bringing it down, not putting your opinion in, just documenting what was said. Now, if you go further and you can compute and elucidate and add to the wisdom, all the better. But the status quo should be to report what is seen. Whereas on the other side, I would consider it a bit of the arrogance of the pseudo-rabbi. Why? Because it's not accurate. It doesn't portray what the truth is. It uses, some people in this class before I know what I'm about to say. It uses Gentile for everything. So are we talking about the ger? Are we talking about the ger toshav? Are we talking about a ger tzedek? Are we talking about a chassid omos ha'olam? Are we talking about an idolater? Who, in fact, are we talking about? And each time we mention the ger, we have to know. So the arrogance of, let's say, of the teacher on the pedestal, the arrogance is to say that these things aren't here, that these things don't matter, that they don't need to be taught. No one needs to know. It does need to. They do need to be taught. And then on the same token, we're told, the ger should not delve into the oral Torah. And then the book brings nothing but oral Torah references. So I think that the murky waters of the ger not being clear is simply arrogance of the educator. Whereas I think Rabbi Weiner opened a door in a brilliant new direction, as there's really no arrogance in the text. So we see two radical opposites. One is sublime, opening the door into endless possibilities. You'll see some of the things that we're going to share. And the other side is to cover those up and to pervert it And I looked up the sources; they're not even accurate. It's not good, and there's nothing more than arrogance that does that. And I think that's why ger v'toshav I am anochi. It's encoded, meaning this ger toshav is a loaded topic. It's not for naught that when Shem stood offering the Torah for 400 years, only Abraham came and took it. Shem then goes to Mount Sinai for 1,300 years, waiting for the fulfillment of his mission to come to an end of the tribe of Judah. It began with Shem, Judah, and Tamar, Peretz and Zerach, all the way through then with Ruth and Boaz and Machlin and Kilian, Oved, Yishai, David, Solomon. Solomon gets the inspiration to go visit Shem in Mount Sinai. The epic meeting takes place, and Shem basically says to Solomon, "What happened in 2448?" As now we're in the year 5773. So Solomon says, "Shem, that was the year the Torah was given." He says, "Yeah? Tell me the Torah." That is a loaded question. Why is it a loaded question? Because Shem was the one responsible for this ger v'toshav anochi. Where did Abraham get this idea that he was a ger and toshav? He gets it from his rabbi who was not arrogant, Shem. Shem thereby is the father of the modern day ger and the modern day Jew, both coming through Shem. We know that Adam was given the first code of conduct of creation, and that code went to Noah. And again, here another level of arrogance. What people do is they say, okay, Noah ended, let's say, the old world, and then Abraham, the first Jew, came and taught the world Judaism. Only Isaac accepted Judaism in the whole world. Everybody else was an idolater. Of Isaac, only Jacob accepted the message. And this went on to the 12 tribes, 70 souls, coming at Sinai. The whole world was asked to be Jewish. They said no. The Jews were the only ones. They went to the land of Israel. The world now is either Jew or idolater, and that's the way it is today. How many people are told this is the story? This is what is being told. The only truth is Judaism. Everybody else is practically an idolater. Convert or remain an idolater. It's because of the Noah-Abraham connection. Because once you have Noah come off the boat with the flood, we know that Lech Lecha comes right away. Abraham saves the day. He's the first Jew. And now everybody else is challenged to become Jewish. And all through history, nobody succeeded. Nobody ever succeeded to become Jewish. Therefore the world is in a sunken state, and the Jewish nation is all it's about. There's a very easy way to bring down that house of cards. It's called Shem. Shem received from Noah the 7 laws of Noah. Shem also inspired Abraham to be this ger, which began the conversion of what's called those of the firstborn gerim, spiritually, would then come out in through birth process from Isaac, from Jacob, the tribes, standing at Sinai to become the Jewish people, to ensure the world of success in the 7 laws of Noah. That was the purpose of the mission. Now that began with Abraham all the way through until Sinai. After Sinai, you have a Jewish nation. So now what about those that are not of the Jewish nation? Or what about those that were outside the realm of Abraham and his seed? Because of Shem, you now have the ger. The ger was everybody in the world. So you have the ger, and then you have a Jewish nation who was formerly they were gerim. in the same fashion of Eve coming from the rib of Adam. The Jewish nation coming from the heart of the Ger world. Thereby Shem is the father of both. And thereby Shem, as the Jewish nation lives from the merit of Shem, the gerim never died. The gerim always remained effective, going back to Shem. And Shem didn't just take off after this episode. He stood at Mount Sinai, going through the giving of the Torah as if to give witness to God. The world is about the gerim as well. So with Shem standing there in some capacity, the Jewish people receiving the Torah, you are not going to overlook the ger. And he goes even beyond until the seed of David, which came from Ruth and her ger tzedek status. Therefore, the redemption came through the proper conduit. Shem and Solomon meet at Sinai. And now the loaded question, the Torah was given in 24:48. Can you please recite to me this Torah? That's a loaded question if there ever was one. And Solomon recites 3 books back. Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, Song of Songs. And if you look at Song of Songs, what is the message of Song of Songs? The entire book is one big macrocosm of the Jew and the ger tzedek. In a way of expressing the redemption, if you want to know when the redemption is coming, look to Shir Hashirim. When you see the ger tzedek and the Jew in cooperation, that is the time of the end. That's Solomon's comeback to Shem, to Shem's loaded question. If the Torah was given and you are the son of David, I would expect to hear the right answer. Solomon did have the right answer. And then who basically expanded from Song of Songs and into the guideline of the redemption, the famous book of the Vilna Gaon, Kol HaTorah, which is the living embodiment of the ger tzedek, which is the faction ger toshav, and the Jewish people, return to the land, all these things, which really is none other than the truth and the philosophy of the ger. And again, where does it all come to? Solomon's influence coming from Shem. Shem then having that influence with Abraham. Abraham coming now to have Machpelah purchased for Sarah, stating he is in fact ger v'toshav anochi. Abraham is the world's first ger, starting the conversion of the Jewish people. His seed is promised to be a stranger in a land not their own, literal gerim. In Egypt, they were the essence of the gerim. They were a people literally not in their land. Then they would be brought out on Monday night. We relive it on Passover, the redemption, the conversion at Sinai. Does it have to go to conversion for the ger? No. But this was God making a conversion. Now, therefore we have the ger is a factor in the world. The Jew is a factor in the world. Their cooperation is essential. Abraham represents that mission coming from Shem and not Noah. As we explained, from Noah, you get the wrong impression. Noah ended, Abraham began, Jew ended, ger died. When you have Shem as the missing element of that story, you have thriving 2 nations side by side. Now with Abraham proclaiming ger and toshav I am, what does the vav mean? So there's a code in the oral Torah. The oral Torah largely functions on code. For example, when they say things like Kamash Malan. Kamash Malan means so we hear from it. You can say Pshita. Pshita means that's simple. What do you need to tell me that for? The oral Torah is based on terse language with words that might not mean anything, but they have a context that we can expound many words, many ideas, or many feelings from their expression. So the Talmud uses this expression, and commentators such as the Vilna Gaon explain it. Ger zeh, ger zeh. This ger, this ger. Ger v'toshav anochi. Ger and toshav I am. Ger zeh. This ger is a ger tzedek. The ger zeh, but this ger is a ger toshav who eats non-kosher meat and has rejected idolatry, implying that there are two types of ger. All the commentaries suggest the same thing, that we hear from this two. So ger toshav, ger and toshav, doesn't take a rocket scientist to hear. It sounds like two things are being told. He's ger and he's toshav. And for that, they would say ger zeh, ger tzedek. Ger zeh, ger toshav. That for all the places in the Torah that have this code of ger v'toshav or ger toshav, we have to always ask, is it referring to the ger tzedek? Is it referring to the ger toshav? If it's referring to the ger toshav, which level ger toshav? The time the temple stood, thereby he was expected to have a certain level. The time the temple did not stand, such as today, in that case, what's the practicality? Is it a ger tzedek, meaning did he convert? Is it a ger tzedek, did he not convert, has no intentions of converting? Don't ask him when he's going to convert, because he's not going to. He is a ger tzedek, ger toshav. I found recently in the Zohar a title for this, very interesting. The Zohar says ger tzedek proper is a convert to Judaism. Ger tzedek vadai, a certain ger tzedek, he is the ger of the ger toshav, for future reference. So we have the ger tzedek who essentially does everything in the Torah except eat kosher meat as a lifestyle. He might eat kosher meat, but he's also amenable to eating non-kosher meat. The question was even asked before, what if he's a vegetarian? The answer is he should not be a vegetarian. If he's a vegetarian, he's uprooting two principles that are very important. One, by being a vegetarian, he's not eating meat. He's eliminating the pathway of tzedakah or charity between the Jew and the Noahide. The charity is actually called l'chiyuso, to give him vitality. That vitality is the essence of the relationship. So it's like the letter Shin. The letter Shin is a letter of truth, but yet its base is one little point, and it can wobble, side to side. Its basis is not very strong, but yet it's the letter of truth. So the entire sharing of the Jew and the ger is predicated on a carcass. It's ironic, but that's how the Torah is. A lot of times, the way the truth is conveyed through Torah is through a random midrash, the kingdom of David through the Ruth story. Little tiny factors could end up being the biggest rule possible. The other reason why the meat is because of the sacrifices in the temple. How do we get the world to be temple conscious? By promotion of meat. If the world is, let's say, anti-meat, on a self-righteous crusade, I don't eat meat. What you're saying is you're more righteous than the temple. But to promote meat and the concept of kosher, not kosher, is to pave the way to the temple, have the offerings in the temple, and the most pertinent, which is coming up next week, when you have the Passover offering. You're going to have millions and millions of offerings in Jerusalem. And when they make a mistake and it's not kosher, are you just going to throw away the meat? So the gerim always ask, do we have a portion of Passover, in that time? The answer is certainly yes. There's going to be a lot of food. And remember, the basis of our relationship is that food. Because even though it's a weak point, doesn't sound like the biggest point, it'll blow up into the biggest relationship. The ger toshav then has basically two things on a minimalist level: reject idolatry, which is the belief in God, and his job then is to always work on clarifying the true nature of God. Or he can reject the notion of not eating kosher meat. By that, what he's saying is he accepts the whole Torah as a truth, as a document of truth, philosophy of life, and he does it in the physical realm by not eating kosher meat as a priority. Now, here's the draw from Rabbi Weiner right away. Very interesting point between the ger tzedek and the ger toshav. The ger to be a ger toshav is essentially the other opinion in the Talmud of having basic prerequisite 7 laws of Noah. Right? We don't really go by the meat or the idolatry. It's based on the benchmark: does he keep the 7 laws of Noah? By doing so, he must accept the 7 laws of Noah as the truth that it was given to Moses as a command. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't remember standing at Sinai. I know we say we were all there and we remembered. And, okay, very nice, but I personally don't remember standing there. I believe with Emunah that I was there. Okay, it's a different story. But for all intents and purposes, I was not standing at Sinai in the physical realm. So what do? You read the Torah, and the Torah says, hey, all the Jews for all the generations were standing at Sinai. I accept that. Okay, I guess I was. So the ger also. The ger was there, but he wasn't there, just like the Jew. Now, how are you going to come to accept the 7 laws of Noah as being commanded to Moses? To be an acceptable acceptance upon oneself for the 7 laws. So maybe you heard about it from a friend, which is fine, and that's why you accepted. And the Rambam goes on to say that this Noahide has a portion of the world to come. The Jew has a commandment to give him the vitality, which again is the built up on the meat. And that relationship then grows to, because he keeps 7 laws, I help him out, blah, blah, blah. But look at this. If he's a ger toshav, by nature then he believes in the Torah. Because the Torah is what triggered his 7 law association. So the ger toshav is by nature a ger tzedek. And the ger tzedek now, the ger tzedek vadai, who's into the Torah, he now has the concepts of Shabbat. He has the concept of what it means to be a Noahide in the world, which is called dinim, statutes. He has a portion of the Para Aduma that when this temple is standing, he will be in purity side by side with the Jewish people in conjunction with Shabbat. And he has a command. He's most likely honoring his parents. Those 4 commandments were given to the Jewish people when they were gerim before the revelation of Sinai. Those 4 things are, let's call it, Jewish spots in the soul of the ger. Shabbat, Isaiah says he will stand side by side in the temple with the Jews for basically testifying Hashem created the world around Shabbat. Jew and ger alike. That goes together with honoring the parents, says the Ramban. Paraduma, where does the impurity come from? From those that are involved in the preparation? From the ger taking his place with the Jewish people. And the statutes, that of coming to repentance, is the idea God has chosen this ger to be with him in his life, to put him through whatever he's putting him through, to have the relationship with him. The ultimate expression of creator and subject, as typified by Naaman in the Tanakh. Hence the Metzora, the impurity that came out of it, much like the Paraduma experience. What you have then is the ger toshav is really, he's going into the realm of the ger tzedek by nature, by accepting the 7 laws of Noah. Through the Torah, he has accepted the Torah. That by nature is ger tzedek, according to the commentaries. That ger tzedek then is already going to be keeping certain things in his, at least in his thought process. So at the end of the day, we know there's a schism between the Jew and the ger. But underneath of it all, the true reality, there is no schism. The Ramchal explains that we have the kav, the light from God, the souls, and the bodies. We all know there's no bodies that can become one. 2 bodies are 2 bodies are 2 bodies. 2 souls are 2 souls are 2 souls. Typified by the ger and the Jew, let's say. The Zohar goes to explain the types of souls those are. For example, the Jew learns the Torah to negate the evil inclination of his soul. The ger learns Torah to accentuate the good inclination of his soul. One becomes angelic, the ger, on his highest expression. The Jew becomes not angelic in a different sense, corresponding to the world of Atzilut. And again, this is the difference between ger tzedek and ger tzedek vadai. Which portion of Atzilus does the soul need to express? Different functions, different places, for different reasons of bringing light into the world. But underneath of it all, Atzilus is one world. It's called Atzilus because it's close to God. On that level, there is no schism. So we say ger zeh, ger zeh. This ger is a ger tzedek, this ger is a ger toshav. But we find that underneath of it all, both are under the realms of the Torah. And if the Torah is governing the entire process, we go back to that Sinai revelation. There's the Jew and the non-Jew, the Jew of the negative. But when it comes to matters of truth, there's the ger and the non-ger. The perspective of truth really comes from either the ger or the non-ger. The Jew in this function becomes the non-ger. So the matters of Torah, let's say, the positive side is from the Jewish perspective and the non-Jewish perspective. Jew of the non-Jew. But when it comes to the truth, it becomes about the ger and the non-ger. The Jew relates to the truth by saying, what am I not? That's how you grow. I am not a ger, the non-ger. The ger says, what am I? Abraham says, ger v'toshav anochi. I am a ger toshav, which is a ger tzedek all the way. So you see the semantics of language are there, but they're really not semantics. And they can be conveyed in any language. It's the wisdom of communication of Torah. And Abraham says that right away with ger v'toshav anochi, bringing the Or Chaim commentary. And he says, why does he say ger v'toshav? And the idea is he's saying the laws of the ger toshav come in here. I have to say I'm a ger. Not just toshav. If I say toshav, they'll say, he dwells here all the time. He's practically a local. So Abraham says, ger v'toshav. I really am not from around here, guys. Now I happen to be here. I want the cave. But just know I'm really not here. This is the essence of the Torah and the truth that belong to the world to come, where the ger and the Jew really are from. But even more so, the ger is really not from here. The seichel, or the intellect of the Torah, is called seichel, is a ger in this world. The intellect of the Torah is a ger in this world. I take that literally. Where does the seichel of the Torah have an avenue or a portal to come into this world from? The gerim. And where does the Torah have a portal to come into this world from? From the Jew. You must have the two working side by side. The intellect that goes with the Torah to go with the intellect. So when you look at the ger, you might not see that much Torah. Maybe they weren't in yeshiva, they don't even speak Hebrew. But that's not to the detriment of his seichel. He has the intellect of Torah in his head. The starting point of the seichel of the ger is to say, I'm holding a paraduma, where are you holding? People wouldn't believe it, but that's what seichel is. That's what the intellect of Torah is. The Jew may be predisposition to the Torah. The ger is preset to the seichel. He is the thinking Torah all the time. So for this, the Torah has good counsel. It says, to the ger, you shall not learn Torah like the Jew. Many people read that as a command, or die. Don't take it as command form. Take it as it's good counsel. Because what happens is, the ger loses patience on the Jew, much like prophecy in Shir Hashirim. He runs to convert to the Jewish people. Lo and behold, he probably doesn't learn that well. Then the Jew gets arrogant on his side. He says, well, I've been learning for 3 years. I am going to go teach the Noahide world. He goes, and he gets lost in their learning of Torah. The Jew, point blank, learns lo lishma, not for his own sake. And they say, if you learn not for your own sake, you'll come to learn for its own sake in time to come, through merit, and becoming righteous. The ger only knows what it is to learn for its own sake. He's coming for the Yetzer Tov. So when the Jew realizes that he has a Yetzer Tov to nourish, he's defeated his Yetzer Hara, and he finds the Torah of the ger, he says, wow, this is how learning should be. That's where the Torah and the seichel really unite. The ger need not run backwards. In this case, he is in the front. The Torah must go to the seichel. Then you can ask the whole famous question, the belt of the belt loop. Who's holding who up? Because the Jew only grows when the seichel reaches the Torah. But that is the nature of the connection. The seichel and the Torah, which both belong in the world to come. But the domain of the world to come is by the ger. Remember, the ger comes from Shemayim, the heavenly aspect. The Jew is of this world, the ground, the earth. So even though you start with your feet on the ground, eventually you have to learn how to fly. The ger wants to return to that angelic world. The Jew has it too. That's the realization. To realize the ger is that divine being also, but you are too. The Jew doubts even his own levels of ability. So ger toshav is to say, yes, he's toshav, but don't forget about the ger. I'm not from around here. Both people have to realize that. The Jew has a mitzvah really to be a light to the nations. To populate the world, fruitful and multiply, the first mitzvah, and to believe in the Torah. The Torah says, make the world come to Noahide. The Jew would say, I don't believe that, and the Torah says that. But as Moshe Weiner will tell you, where does the idea of forcing the Noahide laws on society even come from? It's not one of the 613 commandments. It's accepting the Torah. You have to accept the Torah. And with that comes accepting the commandments. And then maybe you can begin to be a light to the nations. Once you become a light to the nations, the Jews get more Jewish, the gerim get more ger. Torah and seichel grow, knowledge of God fills the world. But God has plan B. Thank God for God. Plan B is what happens when the Jews are not being light to the nations. Torah values break down. The ger becomes more and more shrouded in darkness. The world has never been more dark than it is today. So what happens is you basically have the whole world worthy of being killed. To the perspective of many. But remember what we say. God is with the ger. God put the ger where the ger is supposed to be. So what you might call a world full of people that are not worthy, I call it the Naaman program. A bunch of people that are going through it because God simply said, do this for a while. And they don't know what they're going through. And the world judges them, laughs at them, and says, look at these people. But give it a little longer, and you're going to have about 7 billion people asking themselves, why do I have Metzora on my skin? They're going to seek the prophet of Israel. They're going to seek to dunk in the Jordan, to go to Samaria. In 2013 terms, that's called getting rid of Hamas, asking for Mashiach, asking for the temple, requesting Ger Toshav status in the world. I call that the words of the prophets. And we're a step away. Because when the world's really going through its times, there's a deeper message to the story. So you can either accept the Torah, and be the light to the nations, or you're about to have a rude awakening when 7 billion people come out and awaken from the Naaman program. Realizing Ger v'toshav anochi. And the real nature of Torah and seichel. And what it is to have the intellect of Torah in your head. As the Or Chaim explains, when Abraham says, Ger v'toshav anochi, he's a way of saying there's the laws of vitality are given. I'll finish with this. Do we have Ger Toshav today? 99.9% of the world will tell you no. Of the 0.1% that maybe will say yes, if they're smart, they'll turn to Moshe Weiner's book, and they'll say, I don't understand the book well enough to ascertain yes or no. Because for every moment he says yes, he explains with let's call it an improper pill pull, Meaning it creates confusion. It does understand a matter within a matter, but it's not really the flair of Shem's Torah. It's everything but Shem, which tells me then that Shem is all around this. The idea of the Ger Toshav, he is here today. In the book of the rabbinical writings that he brings, there's a million answers to why. Why there is a Ger Toshav today. So just know, as when we'll get into the book more and more, there is a Ger Toshav today. The Torah says so. It's commanded upon Israel to go out and find the Ger Toshav and to give the vitality, l'chiyuso. The relationship is, was, and always will be. You can get bogged down with the technicalities, what about this, what about that? The bottom line is, do you want to honor God? If you do, then the Ger and the Jew need to get together and work the Seichel, the Torah, together. That is the honor of God. That will be a light. That will awaken, let's say, even the Naaman program, to bring the Metzora to the surface. To have 7 billion people asking, where is the prophet of God? I've rejected the false prophets. Where's the prophet of God? And with that, we'll end here. This is Bereshis 23:4. Ger v'toshav anochi. Abraham as the original Ger Toshav. And from the light of Abraham, we can understand the beginning of where he comes from, who he was, where it was going to go to, even into contemporary times where the Ger comes into play. Again, we have a long ways to go of teaching this topic. No pun intended, Rome wasn't built in a day. So the point is, destroying Rome, destroying the exile, as Avadi the prophet pronounced. It's out there. The tools of bringing it down are out there. Our job is to get the truth out, follow the Torah, accept the Torah, and make the relationship a reality. Have a great Passover. Saturday night, I'll give over some the deeper facets of Passover, of what to look forward to in if anybody who looks to have a Seder. So with that, enjoy the rest of your week. Shabbat Shalom, and see everybody for the Parsha on Shabbos. Thank you. By the way, questions, comments, or feedback, I can be reached at Rabbi Katz at virtualyeshiva.com. Every Wednesday night, 11 o'clock, Israel. Every Saturday night, 10 o'clock, Israel. Have a great week.